Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Jody Spencer, and you are watching our latest episode of In the Hot Seat. To those of you who are frequent flyers at the show and you're familiar with the show, you know that we're going to put someone in the hot seat today, and we're going to ask any questions that you have. Feel free to pop those into the Q&A session down below. We'll answer those live as we go through our session. This episode is going to dive into understanding how to measure value, which is a really interesting topic because, as those of you followers of the show know, every 2 weeks we put someone in the hot seat to talk about and sometimes even debate as we're trying to understand and humanize the digital experience, right? And we look at everything, the whole life cycle of the customer. Everything is up for discussion. And today we're going to dive into that squishiness of value. And I love that, Thomas. I love when our guest, Diane, talked about value being squishy, right?
Yeah,
It really
has been a nice word, yeah.
Yeah, I really like it because I really did think that I understood how to measure value until I had the conversation with Diane, and then kind of went back and I had to reevaluate how I thought about a few things. And it really wasn't that easy. You had a really good example that we were talking about when you were bringing up the idea of solar. So yeah.
Yeah, well, solar is a value in itself, right? And hence the providers that put solar onto my roof keep it for themselves by confusing value with price. And the price makes the value zero for me. Because if I have an ROI of 10 to 14 years for this funny solar rig on my roof that I may or may not get, then this is the lifespan of the system about. So means there's no value other than me being proud of saving the planet or proud for saving the planet.
You are contributing to saving the planet. And you're right? The solar, I think back to when we put solar on our roof and the idea of the solar shingles, that was just at the beginning. And the technology wasn't there yet. And now fast forward, we have solar on for several years. And if the technology is so advanced now, the ROI on that would obviously be very different. So while I'm not 100% with you on my ROI is nothing because I've benefited. I can see the argument in how some of the situations do take a little bit longer. So yeah, I agree. Output is actually you and I had some questions going back and forth on the LinkedIn string about output versus outcome, which I can't wait to dive into with Diane.
That is a funny one as well, because too many people still confuse output with outcome.
Or do they? I think maybe, do you think we should bring Diane in to kind of dive into some of this?
Yeah, let's probably do that.
Diane Gordon has been building and leading post-sales teams for SaaS companies for over 25 years, ensuring that customers renew. That's her thing. She's been wildly successful in part because she understands how important it is not just that customers use products, but that they feel like they're getting their money's worth. That may be one of the best bios that I've actually had the opportunity to read. Diane, welcome.
Hey, Diane.
Great to be here.
After I read your bio, I want you to come and talk with my groups. Welcome to In the Hot Seat.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. We're really excited about this.
Before we dive into, if you heard Thomas and I talking prior about the output and outcome, before we even get there, because I do want to dive into that. That was a really interesting conversation, I think, that we were having back in Green Room. But let's just level set, right? I think it's really important for us to define and get on the same understanding of what value is, right? Can you help us understand that?
Yeah. So it's unfortunate that it's so squishy because, quite simply, value is measured by the outcomes that a customer expects. So it's not how much I use a product. It's, does it do for me? Does it give me the outcomes that I was expecting when I plunked my money down? And so, and there's often a lot of confusion between usage or, the product's doing a bunch of stuff for me, but at the end of the day, the question is it accomplishing these things that I have in my head? And so, like the crisp example of this is, and I have a consulting client right now who they sell Yottaa. They sell software that makes your e-commerce site faster, right? And great, but at the end of the day, it turns out customers. So we can give them all these great performance measures, and they churn if they don't believe that the speed has improved their actual revenues. So, what they really care about is they believe that there's a connection between speed and people buying more. And that's theoretically true. But if we can't prove to them that their revenues have gone up, it doesn't matter whether their site is lightning fast. Well, that's a great example of we see they're using all the page views they bought, that site's, lightning fast. And then they're like, yeah, but our revenues haven't gone. And revenue isn't something we have visibility into. So what you want to understand at the outset is how are they measuring value? And they go, well, we want to make at least as much revenue additionally that we were spending on your product, right? Or, it doesn't matter that it's fast. And so that's a great example of in there all the time, using the heck out of it. But if it's not producing more revenue, it doesn't matter. That's a really crisp example.
Yeah.
But a sort of less crisp one is I'm working for another client right now, and they sell software to MSPs, managed service providers. And, again, they're looking at adoption of and likelihood of renewal through the lens of are their MSPs in the product all the time? Are they using all the features? Are they contacting support? Are they like vibrant as a user? But really, what those customers care about outcomes is it remove all the headaches I had. It's less of a measurable thing, but still the outcome is this easier than it was when I didn't have this or when I had it from another vendor? And that's really what they care about. Is like, is this easier? Are my bills more accurate? And so again, it's another example of they could be using the product like crazy. We assume they're good to renew. And then it turns out that actually they're not so happy because it's not that much easier than it used to be. And so it's really important to get the customer to say, here is how I'm going to measure value, and then to align with them on that and be checking in on it constantly, because that's a real indicator of health.
But isn't that, if I quite fast right now, isn't that directly an indicator for that people confuse output with outcome? Because the output apparently is that the site is faster. If the software works.
Yeah, the site is fast, or, in the case of the MSP software, it's indeed letting you, the output is that it's automating your ticketing process. It's doing that. And that doesn't matter at all if, if the outcome isn't. And the thing that's interesting about outcomes, right, is they're often not things that your product has visibility into. It's some business metric that only the customer knows. And so you have to ask them constantly, well, what are your e-commerce sales now? How much of a lift are you expecting to get from this? If they say, oh, I'm expecting a 10% lift, well, then you need to find out over time, are they seeing it or not? And that's what will really tell you whether they're getting the value they expected.
So let me ask a question on that, because what I'm hearing you say and the examples that you gave, could one argue then that value will always be increased revenue, right? When you're working with businesses,
No.
Why?
Well, ultimately, maybe. I have an example later on in my notes. I did some consulting work for a great company called Jellyfish, and they sell something. I think of it as a CRM for engineers. So they're making a market. It's an engineering management platform, and so they have a variety of use cases that people care about when they buy Jellyfish. So one is my software releases are never on time, and I need to have my releases hit the scheduled dates. Another one could be I want fewer defects, fewer bugs in each release. So those are ultimately, I guess, if you really indirectly, those impact revenue. But,
Right.
but so the thing is, if you say to a Jellyfish user, well, you're in there, you're using it, your whole team is in there, they're logging their time, we're checking quality, all those things are true. What they're going to say is, yeah, but do I have fewer defects per release? Now, Jellyfish can't know that. The customer has to know that. So it's another example of the outcome the customer cares about has to be acknowledged by both parties. And then you have to, A, be asking them what that data is, because you don't have it. It's not, you have no way of knowing whether they have fewer defects in their code. And you also have to guide them through not only this thing you do with our software, but here's the business process changes you're going to have to make to get to those outcomes. Because most outcomes that you're looking for are going to require not just use of your software, but some stuff the customer has to do on their side. So and this might be a good time to put up that slide that I shared with you.
Let me pull that up.
Because it in simple terms, I think most people see this and they kind of immediately get it. So the reasons people buy things are often called value drivers or use cases. So what are the reasons somebody buys your product? The activities are the things they do with the product to achieve. So that's the usage, right? Their adoption and their usage, which is typically how vendors measure value. But those are the things they do to achieve the outcomes that they have in mind. So, a example I use a lot is Peloton. So Peloton, people might buy it for different reasons, right? It might be like, I want to lose weight or I want to improve my endurance. So the thing is, if let's say I buy the Peloton, I decide to stop using it as a coat hanger and I get on it every day for 15 minutes and I cycle at level 1, right? So I'm using it regularly, right? But I'm not achieving the outcome of losing weight. What Peloton does that's so great is they guide you. They ask you what you want to do, right? What your goal is. And then they guide you to the programs you should follow to achieve the outcome, right? Sure, you should use our product, but you shouldn't just use it. You should use it in this way, right? And same thing, if I want to improve endurance, that guidance is going to be different. And so it's a perfect example of, just getting on it and using it. It will not help me achieve the outcome I care about unless I use it in a specific way. Does that make sense?
That does. So I was trying to mess around to get us all with the view with us and the slide, and it just was not working. So I apologize about
Yeah,
that.
no, that's okay. And so the same thing goes for software, right? That the other example on the slide was Salesforce. People buy Salesforce for a variety of reasons, and it happens to be very sticky. So once you're on, it's really, really hard to move away. But if I'm buying it because I want a single source of truth for my customer data, and my outcome is going to be that I improve my top of funnel reach, which again, Salesforce has no way of knowing, but I can measure that. Like I don't want it just because it's a single source. There's a reason I want that, right? And I do specific activities with Salesforce to achieve that outcome. I might not do some other things that wouldn't lead me to that outcome. So that's my point, is that my reason for buying might be listed on Salesforce's marketing cloud. I'm like, yeah, single source of truth for the customer data. But if you really say, well, why? Well, it's so that my funnel gets better, right? I have quality data in my funnel. That's really why I'm buying.
Stickiness is a good word there, because stickiness tends to shift the value from the buyer to the vendor. So how can a buyer work with that, or should work with that?
So stickiness is, I'm a fan of things being sticky, not because they're just hard to uninstall, although I'll take that any day of the week. Salesforce is a good example of that. There's other things. I mean, any popular ticketing platforms are good examples of that. But I mean, ultimately, you have to provide, the software has to be of reasonable quality. But there are often specific features that are, perhaps if you're differentiated in some way, that if somebody uses that one feature that only they can offer, that is critical to your business, that one feature can make you sticky. But um, you know, but I agree that I think in cases where it just involves so much implementation work that there's no way you're ever going to leave. It's not
Mm.
the best way to have stickiness, but it's a way.
So Stephen, one of our frequent viewers, hi Stephen, asks a good question, right? So the outcomes reflect customer expectations and output reflect what customers perceive as delivered. Is that an accurate
Yeah, or
summary?
I might say it a little differently. Outcomes reflect the customer expectations 100%. That's exactly right. What I would say is output is essentially what the product does for them, like, or enables them
Yeah.
to do. So I guess that's what's delivered. Output would be from Salesforce. Oh, I get all these great reports, right? That's output, but that doesn't help me, unless it's actually helped me achieve my outcome. The Peloton, it's got all these cool features that I can use. I can cycle through Scotland if I want. That's awesome. That's output. That's a capability, but it doesn't help me lose weight unless I ride through Scotland every day, right? Like, so that's the difference.
How about outcomes or results? Let's call them results for time being, that are not expected by the customer but still beneficial for them. These are not expected by
That's
them,
that's a great point.
but
I mean,
it's still an outcome.
yeah. So often customers don't. This is what's really surprising. Is often customers don't know how they're going to actually measure value, and they wait until it comes to renewal time, and they're like, "Oh, geez, I don't know. Is this really worth another $100,000?" So you have to guide them. Often you have to guide them to the likely outcomes that like when our customers buy. Um, the outcomes they typically expect are fewer defects in their software, or they expect more on-time releases. And you list the ones that your software can deliver, right? And you say,
Mhm.
which ones of these are most compelling to you? And they're like, oh, geez, definitely defects. We have a huge problem with defects, but we're always on time. I don't care so much about that. Great. Let's measure your defect rate right now, right? And
Mhm.
now we're going to show you how to use our software and make any necessary business process changes so that your usage of our product will result in fewer defects. But I'm a big fan of listing the outcomes for the customer and having them choose.
Mhm.
It's sort of like it's like giving them a menu in a restaurant. And no restaurant, you don't walk in and go, "Hey, I feel like eating this thing that you probably never make." Like, you don't want the customer picking some outcome that you can't actually help them with. So I'm a big fan of saying, these are the kinds of outcomes our customers achieve with our product. Which of these is interesting? And almost always they'll go number 2, number 6, and number 8. Great. Thank you for that. And then you stay aligned on that across the life cycle. Here are the things you need to do with our product and potentially in your business to achieve those outcomes. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I'm going to ask a question from the customer's perspective, right? Because the idea when we're buying or signing contracts for solutions, I think some of the time as customers or end users, we're very much used to KPIs, the metrics, the output, if you will, as opposed to thinking about that as, is that really the value that I'm
That's
getting
right.
versus? So
Yeah.
my question is, how do we begin that education process in keeping them on track throughout that life cycle discussion? Because I could see, as you're going through a QBR or a business review meeting with a customer, I mean, this starts to get a little bit, I want to say, quote unquote, fuzzy. Like it is.
This is why I think, I'm a big believer in creating a value framework, much like what I showed on that slide, where, you articulate, here are the reasons customers buy, right? They buy because they've got engineering challenges, right? And, across the board. And But the main outcome they want is that, they have, more on-time releases. So, so what you do, right? Literally, what you do is, in the handoff from sales to your post-sales team, the salesperson says the outcomes they really care about are number 2 and number 6, right? Those are the ones they care about. And then your post-sale team in your kickoff meeting says, we're really excited to have you as a customer. We have a lot of functionality. We're going to show you how to use our product to achieve those outcomes, number 2 and number 6. Are those the ones you really care about? And sometimes the customer goes, yeah, that's what my boss thinks, but I really think number 7 is important. And either way, you go around and you align on it. And then at every cadence, maybe not every cadence meeting, but every other one, you're like, how's that metric looking? Let's see what steps you've taken. How are you using it? Here's your guide, right? Here's your playbook for using our product to achieve that outcome. And, Jellyfish does a great job of this. We actually created guides to get people to every possible outcome that they might care about. And the steps you take are different, right? There's whole parts of the product you might not even use if you don't care about outcomes 2 and 8, right? So what you do is you use that to anchor your interactions throughout the life cycle. You keep having this come up. So in an EBR or QBR, imagine that you go, here's what your usage looks like. You've got 80% of your engineers are in the product. You're producing 27 reports a month. Your usage is really high. You're using all the capabilities of your contract. Moreover, now let's talk about adoption versus outcomes. Moreover, in our last check-in, we showed that your software releases were 10% less buggy, right? So you have to actually hold both things up: the usage of the software, the contract that you're paying for, and then the outcome, how they're doing against the outcome. And you do that, and just imagine this through line across if you picture one of those life cycle journey diagrams, with the arrows and the circles for each stage. At every stage, whoever on the team is talking to the customer at that stage, they need to be talking both about the product and its capabilities, as well as the outcomes the customer is expecting.
And that is something that I'm going to pull up. Stephen actually just made another comment, but I want to focus in on something you just said, because I think this did answer you answered this question in a way, right? Do customers always know what outcome they want?
Yeah, that's such a great point, Stephen. And that's my point, is that they don't. And so, and it's really risky to not work with them to identify those, because you're essentially leaving the renewal to chance, right? So, if you make the assumption that somebody is, buying the Peloton because they want to lose weight, and your default program is a weight loss program, and, they use it for a bunch, and what their real goal was to improve endurance, they might be 10 pounds lighter, but go, geez, my endurance is still terrible. And so, like I said, the thing to do is give customers a menu of outcomes that they can achieve with your product, and have them identify the ones that are most important. Then everything you do is about guiding them to those outcomes with your product. And I think we all know that, a piece of software can be used in a variety of ways. But depending on what you really care about, you would use it differently. You would prioritize the use of some features over others. So Stephen, super great point that I don't believe you should just ask an open-ended, what are you expecting? I think you should say, these are the outcomes we can get you to. Which ones do you want? And then you're in control of leading them to those.
And when we're talking about this idea of removing the squish from value and helping to guide that process, something you said that I just want to circle back on, we were talking about life cycle, right? And making sure, to me, it's also an opportunity for internal education as well, right? I'm a big believer, and you've probably heard me talk about this. I like to do away with the term handoff anytime I go into a customer, because to me, it's an introduction, right? The teams come together, they work the account all together. And I think when you're talking about helping customers identify what they want to track, what is the outcome that we should be working toward, it is critical that as the vendor, we're all talking about that same
The same way, right? Which is
internally, right? And everybody from the salesperson to the post-sales team to the ongoing customer success
that's right.
department, everyone needs to be in lockstep and understand throughout that process.
That's
And
right.
I think that's one of the areas where we have some work to do as vendors, because we don't think about
Yeah,
this
I'm actually
internally.
on Wednesday, I'm speaking at a conference in New York on this. I'm running actually a workshop on creating value frameworks, because that's the,
Mm.
you get in a room with the
Yeah.
appropriate stakeholders and you go, okay, people use our card, how do they measure success? What are the metrics they look at? What are the outcomes? You brainstorm those, right? And you kind of go, all right, well, what would we do to guide people to those outcomes, right? What's the path we would take them on? And then that framework is used by marketing, it's used by sales, it's then used by post sales. So, ideally but when sales says what outcomes you're expecting, the customer shouldn't be surprised by that question, because your marketing collateral would have said, we're a CRM, and the reason all the outcomes people get from using us are, higher quality pipelines, or pick your favorite set of outcomes, and the customer then goes, oh yeah, those are the outcomes I care about. So when sales says, the kinds of outcomes you can get with our software, which ones are you interested in, the customer's not like, well, what are you talking about? I'm buying you because you're a CRM, right? And so you start that conversation early. I will tell you that that's, at some companies, that can be a big effort to get adoption of the framework at the front end. It is completely fine if you don't do that. So the poor man's version of this is, which I often start with, is you assume that you don't have to engage sales and marketing at all, and then at handoff, which I know you don't like, but at handoff, the CSM can say to the salesperson, which of these outcomes do you think the customer cares most about? They can ask that question right then, and then validate it at kickoff with the customer. So it's not ideal. It's better if the customer's heard it before, but I also recognize that, organizational politics are such that getting buy-in across pre and post and marketing is a lengthy thing. My point is, you don't have to wait to do that. You can go ahead, and in fact, at Yottaa, we started post-sale, and only now we're bringing it into the pre-sale process. And it's really helped quite a lot.
But that's quite funny, actually. So let me turn your words a little in your mouth. Also
Oh
in
no,
line with
Diane.
also in the light what Stephen just made. So the customer doesn't know what they want in terms of outcome. This means that the vendor, not the buyer, needs to educate the clients about what they actually want.
Mhm.
Means every software business is a consulting business. And what you have as a product is kind of or as a solution is kind of, well, something that comes along with it. So should that really be the case?
It's not unlike, you go to a restaurant, you say you want a glass of wine, and they say, well, what do you feel like? I want something kind of, woody or something, that you have to, it's wine, right? They could just go, here's a bottle, right? So I do think that unless your solution is like, a little app on the phone or something like that, I do think that, and people have used the term value selling for a long time, but to me, it's really outcome selling, right?
Yeah,
It's about getting the customer to say the words of what will make them feel like their money is well spent. But I believe you should give them the words to use.
Value selling, this is derogative now again, but value selling comes from the high-priced vendors that want to get away from the notion that they are expensive.
Maybe it's just a nice word, but the idea is, right, if you could achieve these outcomes, how much would that be worth to you, right? And so really what that's saying is, we're going to keep proving that your money's worth it post-sale by talking openly about your business outcomes.
Which brings us to another related topic, basically. So, because there's also the topic of value exchange. And how does that usually work in a non-bartering society? I get your money now, and you may get your value later. So how can that be tied a little better into each other?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not sure I can offer much there. I think that's, it's almost always that you pay for your contract up front, whether that's monthly or annually or biannually.
Yeah.
And then, basically then the onus is on the vendor to prove value. And you don't really get I don't know of a vendor that's like, hey, let us know when you achieve your outcomes, and then you can pay. You don't have access to that data, so there's no way for you to really know. So I'm not really sure what to do with that.
Let me ask the question on understanding, like, how long is it before it's too long to get value from a solution?
I think for me, there's a that's directly tied to the length of the contract. So, if I sign a monthly contract, I basically have to start getting value immediately, right? Immediately. Like you can't onboard me for 2 weeks and then hope I get value in the remaining 2 weeks. If I sign a contract for a year, I've got to get to value in the first couple of months at the outside. So you get a bit more time with the longer the contract is, but time to value is one of those things that getting a customer through onboarding and able to say I'm achieving some outcomes as quickly as possible is critical. And that as quickly as possible is tied to if you're a a CRM and it's a 3-year contract, they're probably not going to be fully onboarded for a month, maybe 2 months. And depending on what their outcomes are, if they want to see that they're getting higher quality leads in their funnel, they may not be able to see that for 6 months, right? So what you want to do is ideally have them identify an outcome or two that you can get to quickly, at least one, so that there's some proof of value before what you don't want is you're 3 months in, you're 3 months away from somebody calling them about the renewal, and they still haven't gotten,
How about attribution then? So let's take the Peloton example and the weight loss. So endurance is fairly easy, but weight loss. So there are 2 aspects to it. So me diligently using a weight loss program and actually doing it, burning calories. And then to some extent, my nutrition is affecting that too. So I'm burning calories, so I eat more, or have a couple of glasses more wine to get some real calories in there. So how can we attribute that to each other?
Well,
the Peloton is doing its job because it's
by also guiding customers about their own business processes. In this case, and Peloton does do this, they're like, not only should you use these programs, but we recommend a diet rich in what? I mean, they will make actual nutrition recommendations for you. As well, if you go to a great gym, a really, a pretty snazzy gym, they'll do the same thing. They'll be like, not only should you use these parts of our gym, but when you're not here, do the following, eat the following, don't eat the following. And that's the same as guiding customers about their business processes. So, if for example, I have an example somewhere here in my notes of Project 44, a supply chain visibility company that I worked for. So it's not enough to just give customers visibility. Like we can give them visibility, but if their desired outcome is they want their CSAT scores to go up from their end customers, they may also need to make some business process changes. So having visibility into the whereabouts of a product is maybe, so we can say, we can give you that. But if your customers are unhappy because your customer support reps are crabby, then we're only solving one piece. Here's the other things you need to do. And this is commonly known as value engineering. What are the things you must do in your business in addition to using our product? And most vendors don't do that part of it, right? They're sort of like, well, we can get you those outcomes, but they ignore the fact the customer may actually have to do some things and sign up to do some things. So you get to the end of the contract and the customer hasn't seen the outcomes. You go, well, our product has done its part, but it's been guiding you on these things. Have you done those things yet? And so, when I say guide customers from they're through your product to the outcome. Part of that guidance has to be about anything they need to do that's not in your product to get there. So the Peloton example, yeah, you need to ride the bike, but you also not to eat 2 bowls of ice cream every night.
Right, because you're signing up, right? You're saying, hey, we're going to help guide you through this process. We stand behind this, right?
If you still choose to eat the ice cream, fine, then you won't get the outcomes you desire. And hopefully you renew with Peloton because you go, that was really my fault, right? But if they don't give you any guidance, I don't know, it's a little bit for each because that's kind of an obvious one. But let's say Project 44 doesn't mention any of these other things that might be impacting CSAT, and they deliver on visibility, and customers like, yeah, our customer sat is still terrible. Well, then, that's kind of on the vendor. I mean,
and guess what else is terrible at that point? Your NPS score, which I know you love NPS, Diane.
I hate it.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
So I'm not a fan of NPS, except for, pretty simple transactions. And the reason I say that is that if it's a complex transaction, a complex piece of software, and you ask somebody, would you recommend us? And they say, absolutely. And then no comments. You're like, okay, well, was it the buying process that you loved? Is it the product that you love? Is it because you really like your CSM? Is it because, we gave you a great discount? Or if I say absolutely not, all right, well, was it the sales rep you hated? Was it the support it's hard to know for very complex products and transactions what a yes or a no means. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I think it is an indicator, but I think, somebody could say absolutely and then still not renew because they're not achieving outcomes that they didn't know that when they got the NPS. So I think it's challenging. It's good for things like, I jokingly say like the public bathroom at the airport, they have the little red, yellow, green buttons you can press on your way out. Like if you say yes or no, I guess there's multiple reasons you could say yes or no, but it's a simpler, it's a bathroom, right? So I think that it's important to think about when you're, I'm a fan of using NPS in combination with CSAT scores at various points in the life cycle. And also, one of my customers right now is doing this, and it's so brave. When you talk with customers, anytime you have a conversation with them, not on a support ticket necessarily, but in your cadence calls, your EBRs, ask them, would you recommend us? Yes or no, and tell me why. And the reason I think that's amazing, it's very brave because it's awkward to do, especially if you think the customer might say no. But there is nothing as good as if you're going to ask the NPS question, do it live when you're talking to your customer and try to understand why. Companies that do that they're doing it the right way, in my view.
And I've had some amazing customer conversations that started out in that awkward, like, I don't want to ask this question because I know we're having some issues.
Awesome.
But it gains additional respect from the customer, right? I feel like every time I've had this conversation, when it was brought to the table, the customer, I feel we worked toward that positive outcome a lot better. And they were willing to walk through.
Right, and if you frame it that way, I know this might be a little uncomfortable. I really do want to know, it's that adage. A complaint is a gift. Without asking, you won't know what you have to do better. So, I don't hate NPS like wholesale. I just think that it has in its current, incarnation, which is you put it in the product or you send it out once or twice a year. I think it's of limited use. It's good for trending, but for complex scenarios, it's a
data point, right? It's another point of data, which brings up a question. We're mixing B2B, B2C in this conversation, and I just want to, look at it a little bit and say, does it differ in how you track and measure value in a B2B world versus a B2C world, or does it not matter? Is it all the same?
Yeah. I don't think so. I just think when it's B2C, it's probably more of a digital conversation. than a live conversation. And, you know, the outcomes are probably things that, you know, that the customer can easily say yes or no to, versus let me go, you know, look at these business metrics of my company. And it feels like, I think the principles are the same, right? And, you know, when you get a survey from your gym or your, you know, they should be asking, are you achieving the goals that you intended to achieve when you joined, right?
Mm.
Not, would you recommend us, right? Those are, see what I'm saying? So I think any consumer, you know, B2C brands that aren't asking that question, right?
How about emotions in that sense? So is a B2B versus a B2C transaction less emotional, or is there less emotional involvement, or in the feedbacks? I'm talking about NPS and CSAT.
Maybe. I mean, it probably depends on what the product is, right? You know, if I'm, you know, buying a you know, a share in a community farm, you know, then it's emotion, right? I want community. I want, but if I'm buying, you know, a gym membership, or if I'm buying a television, then I don't, I mean, I think it's the outcomes are going to, I mean, I guess like anything can be emotional, but it's really going to be, you know, I mean, we just got a new dishwasher. Like for me is like, are the dishes dry when they come out? Really dry? Because our last dishwasher, not so much, right? And that's the outcome I care about. It's not emotional. I just want them to be dry, so I don't have to dry them myself. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Clean and dry, preferably, yeah. Yeah. No, it does make sense. But still, does this make it less emotional or more emotional?
What I think actually B2C, right? We talk about having being able to draw value pretty quickly. Personally, I think in a B2C world, your time to value is probably a little bit more expedited because of the things that we're buying as consumers, right? I think there is a little bit more of a complex piece to the B2C mix because of the way we engage socially on feedback and reviews, which, you know, could tie into this idea of NPS in a way, right? A social NPS, because people are being very vocal socially. And I think that's a little bit more difficult on the B2C. Don't get me wrong, B2B, we have to manage online digital responses, community interaction 100%. I think, at least from my personal experience, though, the B2C world is a little bit more vocal on that emotional side. Thomas, to your point, right? When things
maybe it's vocal, yeah, but still at the end of the day, it's humans who do the stuff.
Yeah.
So that's, and looking into, well, there are also different sizes, or let's say sizes of transactions. So there's a difference if I get some more stationery, or if I buy some long-running manufacturing product that I need to keep up and running for the next 20 years. So that.
Well, let me, because I just looked up at the time and I realized we're down to our last minute. Diane, for folks watching this episode, right, and kind of diving into this idea of how to remove the squish when they're going down the value, understanding value, what would be the one piece of advice you would have for somebody to start in that process? Like the question that they really have to sit down and think about to get started on this path?
I would say crisply define the outcomes that matter to your customers, right? Crisply define, if you were a user of your product and you were wildly happy with it, it would be because what got easier, got cheaper, got, you know, made your customers happier. What are the outcomes? Crisply define those. And, you know, it's interesting. Sometimes vendors don't, like, they have a hard time knowing that. They're like, well, customers buy us because they need a CRM, you know? Well, yes, but why? That's the first thing. And then the minute you've got that, you know that, put yourself in the shoes of them at renewal time. If you said, are you achieving those outcomes? And they say no, what could you have done? to help them get to those outcomes. Much of what we do is getting customers to use more of our product, use more of the features. It's not a bad thing, but what we should be focused on is using the things that help them achieve those outcomes. So defining those is the first step.
Well, thank you for that insight.
Great, famous last
Love
words.
it.
Although the vendor's lawyers probably would have some objections here. But
well, thank you so much, Diane. We are at time. This has been an awesome episode.
Awesome,
I love talking to you about
for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And to those of you watching the episode, if you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, let us know. We would love to talk with you. I'm Jody Spencer.
I'm Thomas Wieberneit, and tune in next time for different faces, different topics, and different perspectives as we put someone in the hot seat or get put into the hot seat ourselves.
It has happened. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.